The total household debt in Canada is more than $2.5 trillion. 2/3 of Canadians are in debt. And the average Canadian owes around $73,500 to the banks. It's out of control, but it's time for you to have some peace. This is the Money Podcast with Jake and Lincoln. No matter your walk of life or your stage of your financial journey, this show will help you achieve financial peace. If you're tired of worrying about your financial future, if you're tired of living paycheck to paycheck, if you're tired of being enslaved by debt, you're about to get the info, the resources, the hacks, the tips, the tricks, the practical advice, and most importantly, hope. Welcome to the Money Podcast with Jake Hebert and Lincoln Peters.
Hey Jake, how are you?
I am fantastic. How are you?
I'm also doing good.
Good. I was just laughing at the joke, Lincoln. Why do bees have sticky hair?
Because they are around honey all day and it gets sticky.
No, because they use honeycombs.
Oh man,
I don't know
good.
why that's funny.
It is good. I got one for you.
Go for it.
Where do polar bears keep their money?
I don't know, something in the pole, North Pole, I don't know.
And snowbanks.
In the snowbanks.
That's right.
Only if you're the snowplow, right?
That's right.
And
that money is gone.
That's right. I have a quote of the day.
Okay.
Want to hear it?
Yes, sir.
It says, "The only man who never makes mistakes is the man who never does anything," by Theodore Roosevelt.
The only man who never makes mistakes is the man who doesn't do anything.
That's correct. Yeah. My dad had that said to him by somebody one time when he was working on a farm and he busted something. And the farmer came out and said, at least that is proof that you're working.
There you go. It's pretty deep.
Yeah, it affected my dad because he told me that I think for the next 2 months he talked about it.
Okay.
Yeah, it was interesting. So, but today's the big reveal.
Yes, sir. I've been excited for this.
Yeah, me too.
We've got some people sending us entries, and we have picked a winner.
We have not picked a winner. We had a spin the wheel app that we downloaded that picked the winner.
That's right.
We didn't just pick somebody.
There was no favoritism here.
No,
it was legit.
Okay, and so it was a phone number that was sent to Lincoln's phone without a name attached to it. And why don't you read out the number there, Lincoln?
The number is 226-622-9514.
9514. So you need to get a hold of Lincoln and you need to listen to this episode.
That's what we said, right?
This is
People
what we
had
said,
to come back and listen to this episode to find out whether or not they were the winner.
Yeah, get a hold of Lincoln and he'll get you fixed up with all the details and how we can pay one of your bills. The other thing, if we do not hear back from this person by the time of the next podcast, then we will draw another winner.
So it's important, folks,
yeah,
that you will listen to this podcast. I don't know how to let you know to listen.
Yeah, I suppose that's a bit awkward, eh?
So just come and listen to this podcast. Send me your, or reach out to me and we'll get you all hooked up and we'll pay one of your bills. And maybe we'll do this again in the future.
Yeah, for sure. I think somebody will reach out for sure.
I think this is us proving that we are pretty serious about what we do.
Yeah, I think so. And we're going to just keep going.
That's right.
Yep. On to the next thing. What did we want to talk about today? One of the things that you and I have talked about off air quite a bit, I suppose, and that is this subject or topic of tipping.
That's right.
Yeah.
Should you tip people in the service industry or anywhere else for that matter?
I say it depends.
On what?
One of the things that I have recently discovered is that the tipping world has changed a little bit. It used to be if you were paying with debit card, like the option was given to you, tip yes or no, it said, and you'd hit how much is the price, and then it would say okay, you'd hit okay, and then it would say tip yes, no, and then you'd hit yes, and then it would ask percentage or dollar. Then you could do either a dollar amount or a percentage amount.
Right.
And then if you hit percent, you could do 10, 15, 20, and it just got totaled for you, right? You could do a dollar amount, you could do $1, you could do 10 cents, whatever.
Okay.
And it doesn't do that anymore. The option is taken away. You don't get to say yes or no. You get to hit 10% for 1, 2%, hit 2 for 2. Sorry, let me back up there. You hit 1 says 10%, number 2 is 15, right?
Right.
Number 3 is 30 or something like that. And so the option of tipping is psychologically removed. I think that's what bothers me about it. Now, should the people in the service industry that actually provide a service get a tip? Yeah, absolutely. I always tip. Even back then when, before they changed the machines and stuff, I always tipped.
Okay.
But I think that for me, the principle of it is it should be up to the customer. And then that in turn, if I get good service in a restaurant, I tip generously, at least in my opinion, is generously, right? And maybe it's not in others. But if I don't get good service and the waiter isn't doing their job properly or whatever, and if they're just having a bad day, I understand that. And I always tip something if I get service. But the amount that I tip changes based on the service I get. And I would expect no less for myself. The better job you do,
the more of a tip
you would expect.
Yes.
Right. And if there are days where you're like, hey, you know what? I'm just off my game. I'm having a really bad day. Everybody's allowed to have a bad day. But anyway, what do you think?
I agree with you that things have changed in terms of how the whole tipping thing is done. I also agree that if you go to a restaurant, for example, that you should, as part of your budget, you should expect to tip the person.
Yeah,
if they do the
sure.
service well. If you can't afford to tip, then
don't
go to McDonald's or something.
Well, here's the thing. Even places, I don't know if McDonald's does it specifically because I go to there once in a while to get my coffee, but I don't eat there very much. But I do eat at Subway.
Okay.
And they have it right on their machine.
Right.
And I'm going, I'm sorry, I don't tip at Subway.
Well, that's
because it's if I sit down and eat and somebody brings me my food, I tip.
Yeah, if they're waiting on you, they're making sure. Yeah, that's where I was going to go with this. Like, if you go to a restaurant, it should be part of your budget.
Yep.
But if you go to a fast food service, and a lot of these fast food services now expect tips.
Yeah.
So do you tip them? Do you not tip them? What is the proper thing to do?
And everybody can make their own choice. If you decide to tip like at a place like Subway or fast food restaurants, and you decide to tip the person because they've generally done a good job there, or they've, gone out of their way to make your life better, and you tip them, I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying that if I go into an A&W and I order myself a burger and they make a burger and they put it out the front, I am fully expecting not to tip because I'm not going to sit down and having somebody come out and bring me water and then bring me my coffee at the table and then come and take my food order and then my dessert order and bring it back to me.
Right.
I think it's different.
You know which one gets me?
What's that?
When you go to some of these places and you are getting ready to pay and they spin this thing around. Like they spin it around and then they just stare at you, expect you to punch in a tip. That one just gets me every time. Like if you go to one of them fancy coffee shops and
they expect you to put a tip in there.
Yeah. You go to one of these fancy places and then when you're paying, they spin this whole thing around and then they just stare at you.
You know what the answer is, right? Don't go to a fancy coffee shop.
Well, why not? What's wrong with a fancy coffee shop?
No, I'm just joking. I'm just messing with you. No, I agree but one of the things that I think that everybody needs to come to terms with psychologically is whether or not you feel comfortable in your own skin.
Okay.
And it has to, in terms of tipping. Like, let's say I go to a fancy coffee shop and I decide not to tip. I portray the exact same attitude towards that person as if I did tip. I pretend that I'm not going to say that I pretend that I tipped, but I am perfectly comfortable in my own skin.
Not having tipped. Okay.
If I genuinely feel that they don't deserve a tip, or in a coffee shop, they made me a coffee. The fact that people are expecting tips is a reflection of a poor society, poor mental society, what I mean by that. And what I mean by that is that the employers should be paying enough to the employees that tips shouldn't be a thing. Like, I actually don't like tips. I think that they shouldn't even be a thing. There are countries where it's really frowned upon.
I think therein lies the problem.
Yeah.
The wages. Because I know I've had friends that work as waitresses and waiters and all that wonderful stuff. And they depend on the tip as part of their wage because their wages are so low that they actually that they depend on.
Oh, yeah. Tip. Yeah. We have our oldest daughter works in that industry.
Okay.
And she gets tipped very generously. And if she doesn't do a good job, she just shouldn't be tipped. But I also think that her employer should be paying her enough so that, well, and then there's the flip side that you need to think about is entry-level jobs like service industry, restaurants, and things like that. The average person, it should be a start job. You're making your way through school. It's a part-time job, or, it might be a part-time income for somebody as a second job, and that's fine. But yeah, generally speaking, I think that in the service industry, nobody should want to stay there. Or I shouldn't say it like that. Very few people should want to stay there. It should be a transitory.
Okay.
Right? That's how I think about it. Am I wrong about that? It's a possibility. I'm open to that. But that's how I've always thought of it.
Okay.
And so if I'm an employer and I employ people in the service industry, let's say I owned a restaurant, I would expect my people to be paid enough so that either they can make a full-time career out of it, or they are there for a period of time to move on to a better and bigger job, a career, right? And I'm talking specifically about waitering, waitressing, right? Or if not that, then somebody's there, say you've got two people living in a house, a mom and a dad, and mom works as a second job as a part-time income, make an extra, $2,000 a month. I'm okay with that. But then the employer should pay you enough to do that so that you don't need to rely on tips. Or,
right.
and mentally, then that is your second income. That is a part-time income. That is a supplementary income. So you shouldn't think of it as your primary breadwinning income, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Right. So that's how I think about it. But there's a lot of countries where tipping is not done. And you think of countries like third world countries like China and Africa and things like that, but that's not it. It's like Spain, Japan. China is actually one of them. But Denmark, Brazil, Belgium, Australia, New Zealand, things like that. Like these are developed countries. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, I don't know. What do you think of that?
I think a tip is just that. It's a thank you for a job well done.
Yeah, it shouldn't be an expectation. Almost,
it should not be an expectation, in my opinion. And like you said, the employers should find a way. And I know in certain industries, the profit margin isn't very big, but they should find a way to pay their staff so that they don't have to rely on the tip as part of their wage.
Yep. And that's kind of, now I do understand we are in this system. And do I tip? Yes, absolutely. And so it's almost like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? We're in this society now, in a tipping society. Do we tip, or do we break the norm and not tip because of a principle we believe in? No. Like I said, our oldest daughter works in the service industry, and she's obviously going into something else eventually. But that's how I think about it. And so I tip, obviously, because we are in this society. But do you want to say how much you tip? What's normal? Oh, before we do that, though, before I ask you that, the other thing that I think about a lot, and I'm not telling people to go one way or the other, and I don't criticize people for doing this, but I very rarely do like the McDonald's donation to, what do they have, the Ronald McDonald House?
Right.
Tim Hortons has the, what's that one, the Tim Camp? Can't remember exactly what it's called yet. And then Dairy Queen has one. I very rarely donate to those.
And then your local grocery stores, they sometimes have like a cancer thing or whatever. Those types of things.
And again, not that I never do, but I do local, like to people I know. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
First of all, it's our local New Testament church, right? We give there. And then other than that, to people that I personally know.
Well, I'll tell you what I do, Jake.
Go for it.
I used to. Pretty much every single time I went to McDonald's, they have sometimes they have this, you like to round up to the nearest dollar or whatever. And I'd be like, yep. And then one day I'm standing in line and I'm waiting for my Big Mac, and it's like, hey, would you like to donate $2? And I'm like, wait a minute. I'm standing inside a building that's owned by a multi-billion-dollar global corporation. And these guys are asking me to donate money so that they can go help people.
Yeah.
And I got nothing against this Ronald McDonald home. I actually know people that have benefited greatly from it.
Me too. More than one of my family members has.
It's a wonderful thing.
It really is.
I'm not mad at them for doing this. This is a great thing. But it's just like, wait a minute. I haven't decided to do this. And so what I've done for the last number of years, I take a percentage of my pay and I put it in a separate bank account.
Okay.
And that is my giving money.
Okay.
So whenever I encounter somebody in some sort of a situation or need, like the other day I was at the grocery store and this guy's debit card didn't work. I was right behind him. I'm like, hey dude, I'll pay for you. Yeah. And he couldn't believe it. But I mean, I got money set aside for specific things like that. Yeah. So I do give. But this global corporation's asking me to donate some money to them, and it's just like, wait a minute. I purposely decide where I give my money. And ever since then, every single time I go through the drive-through anywhere, it's like, nope, sorry, nope, sorry.
And again, I would say that's one of those things where you get to make that decision and you need to feel comfortable with that decision.
Right.
Right. Be comfortable in your own skin, so to speak.
Right.
And so at a restaurant, if I'm sitting there and the cook's gone to make my steak and the server's bringing it to me, the server's making the tip, not the cook. And if the server's, they're doing a good job and they're, I tip. I really do. And I tip generously. But the cook is doing it as a career. So I would actually differentiate that as well. The cook is doing that as a career and they should be paid very well. Because if they make a good meal in a restaurant, that's not an easy thing to do.
No. And doing it
compliments to the people. Yeah.
Yep.
Compliments to the people that are doing that sort of work. Like hats off to you. And the service industry, the same thing. If you like what you do and you want to stay there, good for you. I'm not opposed to that, but I don't think of it that way. And so if they're doing a good job, I do tip them. If I'm like you said, in a drive-through and somebody says, would you like to round up for, Ronald McDonald House? I almost always say no. Almost, not always, but almost always. But again, now I don't have a separate giving account like the one that you described. That's a fantastic idea, by the way.
Thank you.
That's a great way to do it. But we donate to people that we know personally.
Okay.
And like you said, you come into a specific situation and you give. My wife does it through her business. She gives, and I'm not going to say what she does, but there's a certain type of people she doesn't charge for, and then there's personal people in our lives who we give money to. To me, that's more important than, like you said, some multi-billion-dollar global corporation asking for a $2 tip. But having said that, so it's almost like it's a catch-22 because I've known people in my own family that have stayed in the houses that are provided through the McDonald's Corp and that have really benefited from that. And it was a great help to them. So, but could the corporation put those up without the donations? I think so. The principal thing that I do is, do I feel like this is right? Do you know what I mean? So when it comes to tipping, whatever it is, whether you're in a fast food lane, in a restaurant where you sit down, or people that actually need you in a grocery line, like you said, you can pretty easily differentiate between what is right and what is not. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to take this back to one of the words that you said earlier, generously, generosity. I don't think we will ever be sorry for being too generous.
No, I don't think so. No, so if if I can go back to the restaurant scenario, if I'm in a restaurant with a couple of people, my family or a friend or whatever, and there's a waiter or waitress there and they're doing a good job and they're happy and they're bringing our food and they're asking us if we need anything and, have a good attitude and are good to make conversation with, it is fun to tip people.
I agree.
Right? Is that what you were getting at?
Yes. Well, and also the others, like we were in the beginning here, we were talking about it and it sounded like we were probably a little hesitant to tip. Yeah. I just want to present the other side of it because it is important to be generous and we want people to be generous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just make sure that you get to choose where your generosity lies.
Yes. And again, that's, like I said, make sure that you're comfortable with what you're doing.
Exactly.
If I go to a fast food lane and I order a cup of coffee and I drive through, the chance of me tipping are basically zero. Do you know what I mean? If I go and sit down in a restaurant, I'm going to tip. I mentally differentiate between those two very easily.
I do too.
But if somebody delivers a pizza to my house or delivers anything to my house, I tip.
Absolutely.
Right? Like you got in your car and you drove out to my house and I know you're being paid for it, but I feel like I appreciate that enough that I will tip that person. Right? Maybe I'm completely, but if I go to get an oil change done, I don't tip.
I'm personally biased towards the pizza delivery guy because I used to deliver pizzas for a short time.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So I know.
Oh, that's right. You did. Yeah, you mentioned that before.
Yeah, I definitely will tip the pizza guy because I know how much the tips are appreciated. But yeah, back then we didn't have a delivery fee. Now when you order a pizza, there's a delivery charge.
That's correct. Yeah. So but that now, do you know if that delivery charge goes to the driver or?
I don't know, but once they started charging the delivery charge, I had to wrestle with that. Do I still tip the same?
Yeah, maybe you should find that out.
And I decided to still tip the same.
Okay, because I suspect that goes to the corporation.
I have no idea.
Should probably find that out, eh? But I think it goes to the corporation. Yeah,
it's an interesting thing to look into. For sure.
Yeah, I would say being generous and tipping are two different things. And there are locations where I think you should tip, and there are locations where I think you shouldn't. There are times where you should, and there are times where you shouldn't. That's how I look at it. And make sure that you differentiate, know what's right, and know also how much. Like if you don't have a lot of money, you don't need to tip 35%. Don't feel guilty if you don't.
That's what I was going to say next is
Right.
Don't be guilted into tipping.
Yeah.
Especially with that spin around thing, right?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
they spin that little screen around and you punch in your PIN number and all that stuff like right on the screen, and then they just stare at you expecting you to put a tip. Don't be intimidated by that.
You know what I suggest? Don't be intimidated by that, but tip them with a very, very cheerful attitude.
There you go.
Right? Like if you are very happy and cheerful and genuinely care about people, the chance of you needing to tip is actually pretty low to make the other person feel good.
Right.
Right?
Unless the other person has a financial crisis, they'd be like, "Yeah, money be better right
Yeah,
now."
that's true. That's true. But yeah, feel comfortable about it. Don't be guilted into it, is what I would say. Set an amount in your mind, decide on what you want to do, how much you want to tip, make a decision and go with it and make sure you feel good about it. Down the road, if you talk to, 20 people and all of them are tipping differently than you, then okay, maybe you're doing something wrong, but know what you're doing is because you believe it's right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Like we always say, money does two things. It buys you options and it buys you time. But the other one is character, right?
Yes.
This has a lot to do with character.
Absolutely.
So we'll leave it there. Make sure you reach out for that getting your bill paid.
I'll be expecting your message or call.
If not,
and we'll get you set up. And if you don't send us a message, then like Jake says,
goes to somebody else next week.
That's right.
All right.
We'll leave it there. Talk to you next time.
You've been listening to the Money Podcast with Jake Hebert and Lincoln Peters. Jake is a licensed financial professional. Lincoln is a certified financial coach, and their passion is to provide information and to have on professional guests that can help you reach financial peace. We hope you've enjoyed the show, and we hope you've gotten some useful information from it. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. For contact information, you can get our email address and phone number in the show notes. And the same goes for any products that we may mention during the show. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Money Podcast with Jake and Lincoln.